Our
It was a
special
Friday
tonight is the
evening at La
seared
Bella Vita,
scallops with a
the most
lemon beurre
popular
blanc. Would you
Italian
like to start with
restaurant in the
that?
city, and the atmosphere was alive with energy. The soft glow of the chandeliers reflected off the polished wooden tables, casting golden patterns across the cream-colored walls. The faint scent of fresh basil, garlic, and sizzling parmesan filled the air, mingling with the subtle aroma of expensive candles. Waitresses hurried from table to table, carrying trays filled with steaming pasta dishes, glasses of wine, and desserts that looked too beautiful to eat. The restaurant was bustling, yet there was an elegance to the chaos, a rhythm that everyone seemed to know by heart. Among the staff, Lily moved with quiet efficiency, her apron tied neatly around her waist and her hair pulled back in a simple bun. She was used to busy nights, but there was always a thrill in the chaos, a satisfaction in keeping everything under control while smiling at demanding customers. Lily was in her mid-twenties, a young woman with sharp brown eyes that missed very little, and a warm smile that often softened even the most difficult diners. She had grown up in the city, dreaming of traveling to Italy one day, learning the language and culture that had fascinated her since she was a teenager. In the meantime, she worked hard at La Bella Vita, hoping to save enough money for that dream trip, and enjoying the small interactions that made her job interesting. As she carried a tray filled with wine glasses to a table near the window, she noticed something unusual. The front door had opened, and a tall man had entered. He moved slowly, deliberately, as though the world around him did not exist. Immediately, the subtle hum of conversation shifted, people glanced at him briefly before returning to their meals, but the air seemed to carry a tension, almost invisible, yet palpable. The man was unlike anyone Lily had seen before. He was tall, with a powerful, muscular build, dressed in a sleek black suit that looked custom-made. A crisp white shirt peeked from beneath the jacket, and polished black shoes reflected the soft light of the chandeliers. What caught her attention most were the dark sunglasses he wore, despite the dim interior. There was an aura about him that demanded attention, a presence that seemed to slow the flow of the restaurant around him. Lily's curiosity was immediate, her heart beating faster as she wondered who he could be. Her colleague, Grace, standing near the bar, noticed her staring. "Lily, that's Luca Romano," she whispered, almost fearfully. "He's a Mafia boss. Everyone's afraid of him. Do not, under any circumstances, draw his attention." Lily swallowed nervously, but her natural curiosity refused to let her look away. Luca Romano walked with a slow, controlled pace, his head held high, his posture perfect. He surveyed the room with calm, measured eyes, as if evaluating every detail, every person, every movement. It was almost frightening how composed he looked, as if he belonged not just in the restaurant but in control of the entire city. When he reached the hostess stand, he removed his sunglasses, revealing piercing blue eyes that seemed to see straight through people, as though he could read their thoughts. The hostess visibly trembled, her fingers nervously adjusting her uniform as she led him to a corner table. Lily, assigned to serve him, felt a mix of fear and curiosity. She had seen rich and influential people before, but there was something different about him, a weight of power, a hint of danger, and a strange intensity that made her stomach tighten. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Lily walked over to the table. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to La Bella Vita," she said, trying to keep her voice calm and friendly. Her hands were slightly trembling, but she forced a smile. "Can I get you something to drink first?" Luca looked up at her, his gaze unwavering. There was a flicker of amusement in his eyes. As if he found her confidence intriguing. "Yes," he said simply, his voice low and smooth, like silk wrapped around steel. "I'll have a cocktail, something classic, but strong. Make it perfect." Lily nodded, mentally noting the complexity of the order he had requested. As she prepared to take his order, Luca continued to observe the restaurant, his eyes scanning the patrons, the staff, and even the decor. Lily could feel his gaze occasionally resting on her, not in a threatening way, but in a way that made her hyper-aware of every movement she made. Her pulse quickened, but instead of panicking, she felt a strange thrill, an adrenaline that made her feel alive. This was not just another shift, this was an encounter that could change everything. She reminded herself to stay calm, professional, and polite, even though a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, "Be careful, he's dangerous." As she approached the table to note down his order, Luca suddenly spoke in Italian, expecting her not to understand. The words were precise and deliberate, and Lily recognized some of them immediately. It was a complex sentence about wine and preparation, clearly a test. Without thinking, she smiled confidently and replied in perfect Italian, translating his request. "So you want the wine served at exactly 18 degrees, the glass chilled, and the herbs added at the end for aroma," she said, her tone polite but slightly teasing. For a moment, the room seemed to freeze, as though time had paused. Luca's eyes widened slightly, a mixture of surprise and amusement crossing his face. Lily realized instantly that she had made a bold move, mocking him lightly by repeating his words and showing she understood. Her heart raced, but she refused to back down. The subtle tension in the air was electric. Grace, standing at a distance, covered her mouth with her hand, whispering, "Lily, what have you done?" Luca leaned back slightly, a faint smirk forming on his lips. For the first time, he spoke in English, his tone calm but firm. "You speak Italian?" he asked. Lily nodded, her confidence slowly returning despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "Yes, sir. I studied it for years. I love the language," she said softly, hoping she had not overstepped. Luca's smirk grew, but there was something else behind it, a spark of respect, perhaps even admiration. He had seen many people try to impress him, but few did it so boldly and honestly. Lily felt a strange mix of fear, pride, and exhilaration. Here she was, a young waitress in a busy restaurant, standing in front of one of the most feared men in the city, and holding her own. The clinking of cutlery, the low murmur of diners, and the soft background music continued around them, but in that corner, it felt like a separate world, a world where courage, quick thinking, and a little audacity could change the way someone looked at you forever. Lily carefully noted Luca Romano's complicated drink order, her pen trembling slightly as she tried to keep her composure. It wasn't just any order, it was a precise mix of Italian wines, rare spirits, and fresh herbs, and she could tell immediately that one wrong move might ruin everything. Luca watched her quietly, his piercing blue eyes following every motion as if he were analyzing not just her skill but her character. Lily felt her stomach tighten under his gaze, a mixture of fear and fascination running through her, but she refused to let it show. As she repeated the order back to him, her voice steady yet slightly playful, she could feel a subtle energy between them, like the air itself was charged with anticipation. Then, almost instinctively, she decided to tease him just a little, unable to resist the boldness that had propelled her this far. "If you're so smart, then translate it," she said, her words sharp yet light-hearted, delivered in the same Italian he had spoken. It was meant as a small joke, a test of courage in front of someone whose reputation alone could make most people shake, but in that moment, she didn't consider the consequences. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to pause. The clatter of dishes, the quiet conversations, and the soft background music all faded into nothing as Luca's expression changed ever so slightly, the smirk he had worn now frozen in disbelief. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing just a fraction, and the commanding aura that surrounded him became even more pronounced, almost suffocating. Lily realized instantly that she may have gone too far, that the playful remark had been far bolder than she intended. She swallowed hard, feeling a bead of sweat form at her hairline, and instinctively prepared an apology, but before she could speak, Luca did something unexpected. His intense stare softened just slightly, and a faint smile curved on his lips, not an angry or threatening smile, but one filled with curiosity, a glimmer of amusement that made her chest tighten in relief and surprise at the same time. "You speak Italian?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an undertone that demanded attention, as if testing whether she was lying or bluffing. Lily nodded, trying to mask her racing heart with a composed smile. "Yes, sir. I studied it for years. I've always loved the language," she replied honestly, hoping her boldness would not backfire. The moment stretched, each second feeling like an eternity as Luca leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table, studying her intently. His gaze was sharp, almost like he could see through her very thoughts, yet there was an unmistakable hint of respect in the way he regarded her. The fear that had gripped her moments ago slowly began to melt into a strange mixture of awe and intrigue. Lily realized that she had done something no one else in this restaurant, or perhaps even in his social circles, had dared. She had spoken to him without trembling, without fawning, without fear. And even dared to joke in his own language. Grace, standing a few feet away near the bar, had gone pale and was shaking her head, her eyes wide in disbelief. She whispered under her breath, "Lily, what are you doing? He's dangerous, just leave it." But Lily's instincts told her that now was the moment to remain calm, to hold her ground and show confidence even in the presence of a man whose very name could make people bow. Luca's smirk grew just slightly, a subtle, almost imperceptible sign that he was intrigued, that he had encountered someone with nerve and intelligence, traits he valued above flattery or fear. "Not many Americans speak Italian so well," he said slowly, his words deliberate, measured, and somehow both intimidating and approving at the same time. "Most assume they can bluff their way through, or they tremble before I even speak. But you mock me first, then translate. That is unusual." Lily felt a mix of relief and pride flood her, but also the realization that she had stepped into a dangerous territory where one wrong word could change the outcome completely. She nodded, her voice slightly stronger than before, "I just thought it would be more interesting this way, sir." Luca leaned back again, studying her with a level of intensity that made her feel both exposed and respected. In that moment, Lily understood something powerful. She had crossed a boundary that most people feared to approach, but instead of anger, it had sparked curiosity. The restaurant seemed quieter now, or perhaps it was only her perception, as if the world outside this table had disappeared. Diners glanced briefly at the interaction, their whispers of recognition and fear floating across the room, but they could not understand the connection forming silently between the waitress and the Mafia boss. Lily could feel her heart pounding, yet the strange sense of exhilaration was undeniable. She had played a dangerous game, teetering on the edge of fear and courage. And the outcome was not punishment, but an acknowledgement of her audacity. Luca finally broke the silence, leaning forward with a commanding yet measured voice. "Most people judge others by appearances, by fear, or by how they behave when they think no one is watching. You look at a situation, and you react honestly. That is rare." Lily's chest rose and fell rapidly, the weight of his words sinking in. For a moment, all the nervousness, all the anxiety, all the uncertainty of the evening melted into a strange confidence. She realized that in a single, bold moment, she had captured the attention of one of the most feared men in the city, not with flattery, not with submission, but with honesty and a touch of courage. The air between them shifted, charged now not with fear, but with mutual acknowledgement. Lily exhaled slowly, her hands relaxing at her sides, and for the first time that evening, she allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She had walked into a dangerous situation, but her instinct, her honesty, and her nerve had not failed her. And for a Mafia boss like Luca Romano, that rare combination was something worth noting, something that could change the trajectory of the night entirely. For a moment, Lily felt the weight of the entire restaurant on her shoulders as Luca Romano's piercing gaze held her in a quiet, almost hypnotic scrutiny, and she realized that what she had thought was a playful, harmless tease had suddenly escalated into something far more intense than she could have imagined. The air around the corner table seemed charged, as if everyone in the room had subconsciously taken a step back, giving this moment its own invisible space, and Lily's pulse raced as she tried to maintain her composure, knowing that one wrong word could completely shift the outcome, yet at the same time, she could feel a strange thrill coursing through her, a sense that she was standing on the edge of something extraordinary, something rare and unpredictable. Luca's smirk, which had been momentarily frozen, slowly returned, but there was a subtle change in it, a flicker of amusement and intrigue that made Lily's chest tighten with both relief and anticipation, and she realized that despite his reputation, despite the aura of danger surrounding him, he was assessing her, not with hostility, but with genuine interest, as if he were measuring her nerve, her honesty, and her ability to react without fear, qualities that clearly set her apart from the people who usually crossed his path. She shifted slightly, placing her notepad carefully on the table, and spoke in a steady voice, I didn't mean to offend you, sir. I just thought it would be interesting to show I understood," and she was immediately aware of how small her words sounded compared to the magnitude of the presence she was addressing, yet Luca leaned back slightly, his fingers lightly tapping the table, his eyes never leaving hers, and he said, "Interesting, yes, that is one way to put it. Most people would shrink, would apologize, would try to charm me or disappear into silence. You, however, dared to speak honestly, to mock lightly, and yet you did so with knowledge, without fear. That is rare, very rare indeed," and his calm tone, combined with the subtle intensity of his gaze, sent a ripple of adrenaline through her, making her feel simultaneously nervous and exhilarated, as though she had stepped into a dangerous game where her courage was both her shield and her key. The other diners had resumed their meals, but Lily could sense their quiet curiosity, their stolen glances, the faint whispers that traveled across the room, yet in her own little corner, it felt as if time had slowed, the clinking of cutlery and murmurs of conversation fading into the background, leaving only the electric connection between her and the man who had built an empire on fear and power, a man who now seemed genuinely intrigued by her boldness. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her racing heart, and Luca continued, leaning forward just slightly, the light from the chandelier catching the edges of his face and casting subtle shadows that made him look both imposing and unexpectedly human at the same time. "You know, most people underestimate courage because they confuse it with recklessness. But you understand that honesty and nerve carry weight, even in a dangerous situation. Most people would not have spoken to me like this, would not have dared to make a joke in my own language without hesitation, without fear," and Lily felt a shiver run down her spine, equal parts fear and pride, realizing that her audacity had not only captured his attention but had created an unexpected bridge between them, a fragile, tense respect that was both thrilling and terrifying. She tried to find her words, her mind racing as she searched for something clever, something safe, something that could honor the moment without overstepping, and she finally said, "I guess, sometimes honesty and a little courage are worth the risk," and Luca's smile widened, a subtle but undeniable curve of approval that made the tension in her shoulders ease slightly, as if he were acknowledging her bravery in a silent, powerful way. Then, unexpectedly, he leaned back, giving her a measured nod, his eyes scanning the restaurant briefly before returning to hers, and said, "You have guts. And intelligence. Most people in this room, including my own associates, would not have dared to mock me lightly, even jokingly. You, however, did it and survived not just with your life, but with my respect. That is extraordinary," and in that moment, Lily felt a surge of confidence, a sense of accomplishment that made her realize she had just crossed an invisible line between fear and recognition, between a dangerous mistake and an unexpected triumph. Grace, who had been hovering near the bar, finally exhaled audibly, shaking her head in disbelief, whispering, "I can't believe you just did that. You actually dared to mock him and speak Italian at the same time," and Lily let out a small laugh, her chest still racing, feeling the tension of the past few minutes slowly melt into a mix of relief, pride, and exhilaration, understanding fully that she had not just served a complicated drink order or taken care of a dangerous client. She had navigated a delicate moment of power and psychology, where her honesty, nerve, and quick thinking had created an opening into one of the most feared minds in the city, and she couldn't help but feel that this moment, dangerous and shocking as it was, might mark the beginning of an unexpected and unforgettable connection. Luca finally returned his attention fully to her, his tone softer now, almost conversational, yet still commanding. "Remember this, ragazza. Few have dared what you dared tonight. Fewer still would have done so successfully. You are, unlike others," and Lily's pulse quickened once more, a mix of pride and disbelief flooding her, as she realized that what she had thought would be a harmless joke had turned into a defining moment of courage, a test she had not only survived but excelled in, leaving her both shaken and exhilarated, fully aware that this night would remain etched in her memory forever, a moment where mockery, nerve, and honesty had collided with power, respect, and the unpredictability of Human connection. As the initial shock of their encounter began to settle, Lily felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief swirling inside her, like a storm finally calming after threatening to engulf her entirely, and she realized that Luca Romano, the infamous Mafia boss whose very presence could make people tremble, was no longer just an intimidating figure towering over her. He was observing her with a genuine curiosity, an unusual softness in his gaze that she had never expected, as if he were trying to understand who she truly was beneath her confident exterior, and in that moment, the hum of the restaurant returned to her awareness, the chatter of other diners, the clinking of glasses, and the soft strains of a violin from the corner suddenly felt distant, as if the world outside their table no longer mattered, leaving only the two of them in an invisible space filled with tension, intrigue, and a delicate understanding. Luca leaned slightly forward, his eyes meeting hers with a subtle intensity that made her feel both exposed and acknowledged, and he spoke, his voice calm, measured, yet carrying a weight of authority that demanded attention without aggression. Most people judge others by fear, by appearances, by what they think will please me or keep them safe. You do not. You reacted honestly, without hesitation, without pretense, and that is something rare, something almost fascinating, and Lily felt her heart pound, equal parts nervousness and exhilaration, realizing that what had started as a dangerous encounter had shifted into a conversation where respect, subtle admiration, and cautious connection had begun to form. She swallowed hard, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts as she tried to respond in a way that balanced honesty and politeness without overstepping, and finally said, I just believe that people reveal their true character when they are treated honestly. I guess I was curious how you would react, and Luca's faint smile grew slightly, a hint of amusement in his expression that made Lily's chest tighten with an unfamiliar warmth, a small spark of human connection in the midst of the intimidating aura surrounding him, as if he were realizing that this young waitress was not just brave, but perceptive, clever, and genuinely unafraid to navigate the delicate dance of power, wit, and courage. For a moment, the intensity between them softened, though the weight of his presence still filled the air, and Lily felt a strange thrill in the knowledge that she was holding her own, that her instincts, her honesty, and her nerve had allowed her to engage with one of the most dangerous men in the city without faltering, and even more astonishingly, she sensed that he respected her for it, which was a feeling she could barely comprehend, given his fearsome reputation. Luca's voice lowered slightly, almost conspiratorially. Tell me, ragazza, how did you learn to speak Italian so well? Most Americans cannot even pronounce these words correctly. Few would dare to use them in such a bold way, especially not in my presence, and Lily explained, her words flowing more easily now, that she had studied the language for years, had practiced diligently, and had always been fascinated by Italian culture, its history, and its elegance, her passion spilling into her explanation, her confidence growing as she realized he was genuinely listening, genuinely interested, and not merely testing her, as she had first feared. The way Luca leaned back, tilting his head slightly, observing her with that piercing yet now almost approving gaze, made her feel a mix of pride and disbelief, as though she were simultaneously nervous and exhilarated by the fact that a man so feared, so powerful, and so calculating could be intrigued, even impressed, by something as simple as her honesty and knowledge, and the realization was both empowering and surreal. Lily's mind raced as she thought about the implications, about how dangerous men often underestimated people like her, assuming fear would dictate their behavior, but she had defied expectation, and in doing so, had created an unexpected bridge of respect, curiosity, and connection that might have seemed impossible just minutes before. Luca's hand rested lightly on the table now, the sharp lines of his fingers relaxed slightly, and he spoke again, his tone softer but still authoritative. Most people speak to me with caution, some with fear, others with flattery, but you are different. You see the situation clearly, and you act accordingly, without trying to manipulate or appease me, and that is rare. It is refreshing, and Lily realized that in these few words, he had given her something far more valuable than money, tips, or even praise. He had acknowledged her strength, her intelligence, and her ability to remain herself in a situation that would have crushed most people, and the weight of that recognition settled into her chest, a warm, thrilling, and almost dizzying sensation. As the waiter finally brought the first drink of Luca's complex order, Lily carefully placed it in front of him. Noting how he regarded the simple action with appreciation, his gaze lingering on her with a quiet intensity that made her pulse quicken again, and she understood fully that their interaction had evolved from mockery and tension into a subtle, unspoken connection, one where courage, honesty, and respect had replaced fear, mockery, and intimidation. And she felt a strange sense of accomplishment and wonder at the surreal turn of events, knowing that the night had shifted dramatically from ordinary service into an encounter she would never forget, where the most feared man in the city had paused, observed, and acknowledged her as someone exceptional, someone who had dared to act boldly and wisely, and in doing so, had created a surprising, unexpected bond in the most unlikely of places. A bond that would linger in her mind long after the restaurant's lights dimmed and the evening faded into night. By the time the final course arrived, the tension that had dominated the corner table since Luca Romano's entrance had transformed into something entirely unexpected, a strange mixture of respect, curiosity, and unspoken acknowledgement that left Lily simultaneously exhilarated and bewildered, as she carefully placed a perfectly plated dessert in front of him, noting how even his subtle nod of approval carried weight far beyond any ordinary compliment, and she realized that what had begun as a playful act of mockery had now evolved into an encounter where courage, honesty, and presence of mind had earned her a rare form of recognition from a man whose reputation for fear and control preceded him in every corner of the city. Luca, sitting back with the faintest trace of a smile on his lips, watched her with eyes that no longer carried the initial intensity of assessment but rather a quiet appreciation, and for a moment, Lily felt the surreal weight of the situation, understanding fully that this was not about tips or polite conversation, it was about human interaction at its rawest, where bravery and intelligence could shift the balance even in the presence of someone as formidable as a mafia boss. She noticed the way other diners occasionally glanced toward the corner table, whispering and stealing looks at the unusual dynamic. Yet none of it seemed to matter now, as the room had faded into the background for both her and Luca, leaving only the charged, fragile space they now occupied, a space where respect had replaced fear, and genuine interest had replaced intimidation, and Lily's heart raced with a mixture of disbelief, pride, and cautious excitement. Finally, Luca leaned forward slightly, his voice lower than before, smooth yet carrying an edge that reminded her of the power he wielded effortlessly. Few have the courage to speak so freely, to act honestly, and to show wit in the presence of someone like me. You are unlike anyone I have met tonight, or perhaps ever, and Lily felt a surge of warmth and validation unlike anything she had ever experienced, as if the night itself had rewarded her audacity and intelligence with a recognition that transcended ordinary social interactions. Grace, who had been hovering at a safe distance, finally exhaled audibly, her hands covering her mouth as she whispered in disbelief, I cannot believe what just happened. You actually made him respect you." And Lily could only laugh quietly, a nervous yet proud laugh, realizing that she had navigated a dangerous, delicate situation with honesty, presence of mind, and a touch of daring that most people would have thought impossible, and in that moment, she understood that her life, her perspective, and perhaps even her future had subtly shifted in ways she could not yet measure. Luca's tone softened just slightly as he continued, "Respect is earned, ragazza, and you have earned mine. Tonight, not through fear, not through flattery, but through honesty, courage, and intelligence. That is something rare, something worth remembering," and as he said this, the gravity of his words sank in fully for Lily, a young waitress whose ordinary evening had turned into an extraordinary test of nerve and character, leaving her both shaken and exhilarated, and yet filled with a quiet, steady pride. When he finally stood to leave, his movements precise and deliberate, he placed a generous tip on the table, an amount that would have seemed extravagant under any circumstances, and he gave her a small, knowing nod, accompanied by a whisper in Italian, "You are courageous, and I will not forget that," and Lily, unable to suppress a small, odd smile, watched him exit the restaurant, the weight of his presence lingering in the air, a reminder of the surreal, unforgettable connection that had been forged in those intense, fleeting moments. As the door closed behind him, she turned toward Grace, who shook her head in disbelief, muttering, "You did the impossible, you actually survived that and came out respected," and Lily could only laugh, her nerves still buzzing, the memory of Luca's eyes, his words, and the strange, thrilling respect she had earned replaying in her mind, and she realized that tonight had taught her something profound: courage, honesty, and the willingness to trust in one's own ability to navigate even the most intimidating situations could create outcomes beyond imagination, and that sometimes, the unlikeliest encounters could leave a lasting impression, not just because of the danger or the thrill, but because they revealed something essential about oneself, something that even the most powerful people could recognize and respect. And as she straightened her apron and took a deep breath, Lily knew she would carry the memory of this night, the lesson of audacity, and the surprising connection she had made forever, a story of courage and respect earned in the unlikeliest of ways, a story that would linger in her mind, reminding her that even in the presence of fear, honesty and intelligence could shine through and create moments that changed everything.